and welcome to today's live chat. I hope that the information for this went out, because I just noticed now that the video is marked as unlisted and not as being public. This is in fact my fault, not YouTube's fault. Having said that, because they make it so complicated with these lives, there's so much that can easily go wrong doing something like this, that this can in turn lead to problems. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about Coburg. Coburg is in northern Bavaria. It's a really attractive place to visit, and being there, it has this feeling of imperial grandeur about it. It looks as though it is a capital city. Well, it was a capital city. In 1905, the royal families of various countries in Europe that had royal families, so the Kaiser, the Tsar of Russia, the British royal family, they went there, and they had a bit of a jolly whilst they were there. And this has been shown in various things. And I think it was in The Fall of Eagles, which was a TV series on the end of the empires of Europe, which was done in the it's about 50 years ago now. And so that's one thing. I think it was in that, but I have seen it in other fictional things. But there's one thing that really stuck in my mind before I actually went to Coburg, was a photograph that was taken of the families there at Coburg. Now, the royal family, the British royal family, is the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and it changed its name during the First World War to Windsor to sound a bit more British. So being in Coburg, it has all this about it, but also it's got this Nazi past to it. It was the first town in Germany where the swastika actually was hanging from the town hall, and that was as early as 1931. In the Nazi era, it had a prefix to its name, such as the first National Socialist town of Germany, something like that. First National Socialist town, Coburg. And anyway, so there's a little bit about it, but what it looks like, okay, it's quite small, but it's got this wonderful castle at the top of the hill, and that is something which could give it its attraction for anybody who wanted to visit just like that. Now, if we go back 103 years to 1922, the National Socialist German Workers' Party was one of many sort of small parties on the fringes. It had, I think, by then, of course, it had managed to attract audiences of a couple of thousand people in Munich, but not really much more. But after this event I'm going to talk about today, which is called the March on Coburg, it started getting itself in newspapers all around the world. And I've done videos in the past where I talk about, I refer to things in Australia. The reason I quote Australian newspapers is because you can't get any further away than Australia. So that's why, for example, I've quoted things from Tasmania, just to show that the news of certain events got that far. And so if it went as far as the Hobart Advertiser or whatever, then it's going to be, it shows that it really is. You can't get any further than that. By, of course, the 9th of November 1923, you see, Hitler was famous all over the world. And there are there's many newspaper articles. There's a book called The Trial of Adolf Hitler, which I would certainly put in my top 20 books. And in this book, the author quotes newspapers constantly. So no newspapers were his main source of information, and because of that, it shows in these papers from all over the place. He's not quoting the Munich newspapers, he's quoting them all over the place. So Hitler by this time had become a pretty famous person. So 1919, the DAP, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the German Workers' Party, was founded. It was founded by money which came from something called the Tula Society, which was a bunch of rather wealthy people who got together to talk about mystical things and nationalism and things like this. But their idea in founding this society was to have something for the workers. And so they got this character called Anton Drexler, who worked in the Munich railway depot, and he became the leader of this party. And he managed to get a few of his mates to turn up, and that's how it largely started. One of the people in the Tula Society was Dieter Eckart, and the Dieter Eckart, member of the Tula Society, he'd been born into money. He then spent most of this money on women, booze, and drugs, and the rest of it he squandered. And so he became poor, but he became wealthy again thanks to the success of one of his plays in the years leading up to the First World War, called the German version of Peer Gynt. And he is ultra-nationalist, said to be the person who mentored Hitler, and he certainly gave the cash, but also he assisted Drexler write his pamphlet, which was called My Political Awakening. And then when Hitler turned up for his first mission, allegedly to spy, but this story doesn't make any sense, to be quite honest. But when Hitler turned up for the first time, then the leaflet he was given, well, not even a leaflet, it's a 60-page book. It can't be 60 pages. It must, yes, sorry, 60-page book. And it was My Political Awakening by Anton Drexler. Hitler says he read it and they agreed with him. Anyway, so thing was with Hitler, he was pretty good though at marketing, and it was largely thanks to his efforts that the party grew. So it was able even to attract 2,000 people to an event in February 1920, where it was Hitler who rebranded the party the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And the thing is, though, why did people actually want to go there? I think that part of this was because it was very violent, and so people might have gone there for the violence, the same way as people who are a bit older than me used to go to football matches in the 1970s. I don't think it was to watch the game. And so even Adolf Hitler, who in his later life, he showed a great deal of cowardice, but he got involved in fights. And so the meetings could be broken up by the far left, Bavarian nationalists, others on the far right. And so in order to protect these meetings from the fight, they founded something called the SS, but it's not the SS came along later, Seilschutz, hall protection. And yes, and also they had another organization. Then it became known as the Stabswache, and which became the Staff Guard, and that sort of really was just the area, the principal people were supposed to protect Hitler. Now, in the days before they came up with the uniform, they were asked to wear grey jackets with a swastika armband. And so Hitler wanted to formalize this. Later, they managed to get some cheap brown cloth, and so they used that, which then sold obviously at a profit, because they have to cover the costs, and that became part of their uniform. In 1923, the Staff Guard became transferred to the Hitler Mobile Shock Troop, and there's a photograph with this written on, which I've often used actually to show the beer hall putsch, although it wasn't actually taken. I think it was taken in September 1923, not in November 23. So it was about 100 people around Hitler, and incidentally, 15 years in the future, it was this guard around Hitler which formed the nucleus of those that attacked the synagogues on Kristallnacht in November 1938. But I did a video on that in January of last year. So I would say, to come back to Coburg, Coburg is very similar to Vienna or Prague. It wasn't in the same country because Vienna and Prague obviously were in Austro-Hungary, and Coburg was in its own state, which is put in part of Germany. And after the First World War, as the state of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha didn't really have any much sense any longer, and being it was split between Thuringia and in Bavaria. Now, Hitler also, it seems that he liked the place. On the 14th of October 1922, it was his idea of having a special weekend out to Coburg, take 650 SA men there, and there was to be there, the reason why was for something called a German Day. Now, there's been a number of German days in the past. The first one I know of took place on October 1913, Eisenach. Eisenach was chosen presumably because they've got this very nice castle there called the Wartburg, and the car was named after the castle later, and that was also produced in Eisenach. Then in Weimar, which has got a very historical centre as well, in the first third of October 1920, and in 14th, 17th of October in Detmold. I don't know what it is there in Detmold. I know where it is. I mean, it's very important because it was the election just in 1933, just before Hitler came to power. I don't think it was particularly attractive myself. And 27th November 1921, it was 27th of November 1921, it was in Bremen. Bremen, I haven't been there, but it looks very nice in the pictures. Now, so these events were organized by something called the Deutsch-Völkischer Schutz- und Trutzbund, DVSTB. I think I'll call it now, to keep it simple, Schutz- und Trutzbund. This was a vicious, extremist, anti-Semitic nationalist organization, one of many. But of course, none of these organizations had a particularly large following. But many people from the Schutz- und Trutzbund came later into the Nazi Party. On the 24th of June 1922, the Schutz- und Trutzbund was banned in most of the countries within Germany. Now, bear in mind that Germany was several countries, one state, or one country, if you like, but not in another. It could be banned in Bavaria, for example, but not, for argument's sake, in Prussia. And the reason for this was Walter Rathenau, who had been the armaments minister in World War I, he was assassinated by right-wing extremists. And so the Schutz- und Trutzbund got banned, and what the idea was at Coburg was to sort of protest against these bans. And Hitler, who saw himself as part of this Führer principle, which came forward as early as the summer of 1921, he refused to take part in any events organized by Schutz- und Trutzbund because he wanted to be the boss, I presume. But having said that, he did agree to do this event. So the political right in Coburg itself was heavily fragmented, like in many places. The Duke, the former Duke by this time, Duke Karl Edward of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, where was he born? He was born in the UK. He was British. He was the grandson of Queen Victoria, formerly a member of the British family. But the war started, so he had to join the army, and this got him banned. There was a special law was passed to deprive him of his aristocratic status in the UK. In fact, three people were banned by this law. He was one of them. I can't remember who the other two were. And as a result, he felt very put out by all this. He hadn't wanted to go to Germany in the first place. Then he found himself there, and then he's not allowed to go back home. And so he was one of those, a very early support of Hitler as a result. And anyway, there was a Stahlheim in Coburg. Stahlheim was the sort of the veterans organization, but the nationalist veterans organization. And this was politically active, which I've never seen this to such an extent in any other country. Now, veterans tend to be sort of more nationalist inclined, patriotically inclined, up to a certain point. But but in the case of the Stahlheim, this was really quite nationalist organization. There were, of course, lots of other sort of people. It was a bit like the Monty Python in Life of Brian. You've got lots of sort of little organisations all fighting against each other, one with 4 members, one with 5 members, and in total there was probably no more than about 1,000 people in these many organisations. Yes, now I am actually a member of a veterans organisation, but just as a member I don't do anything. In the votes for the parliament for the German Reichstag in 1919, the I would say sort of the centre right got an absolute majority. Having said that, the Social Democratic Party did get 45% of the votes. In the Reichstag election in June 1920, 25% of voters voted for the sort of the liberal left DDP, just under 24% for the hard right German People's Party, and 40% for the left-wing parties, approximately. And so that's roughly what the breakdown was. Now, when the Schutzbund, Schutzentreutzbund sent the invitation for Hitler, they probably didn't expect him to show up. But when he did show up, when he did it, they thought he'd only turn up with a 1 or 2 of his friends, and not to hire an entire train to bring a marching band with him as well, and well as the instruments. And he got his entire, everybody there who was anybody within the Nazi party at the time was there. So it wasn't just Hitler, but Max Amann, it was Dietrich Eckart, Hermann Hesse, Anton Drexler, Christian Weber, Ulrich Graf, Rosenberg was there, Kurt Ludecker, Rudolf Jung, Martin Mutschmann. Well, Martin Mutschmann did a video on him recently. He brought along everybody. Even Julius Streicher turned up, and from Nuremberg. So Hitler took advantage of this as a propaganda opportunity to make his party known outside of Munich. The Nazis weren't just carrying musical instruments; they were brought along with them clubs and things that could be used as weapons, such as these mountain walking sticks and things of this nature. And not only that, but there were another 20 Nazi party delegations from across the entire country of Germany. These were just like 4 or 5 people, but even so, I mean, 4 or 5 people times 20, and you've got nearly 100. So as soon as the main train pulled into the station in Coburg, the fight started. Some of the local inhabitants of Coburg started to protest. Some of them would have been on the Nazi side, and they were started fighting. And now Coburg isn't particularly industrial. It certainly wasn't. Certainly isn't now. It wasn't even then, really. But the towns nearby, such as Neustadt and Sonneberg, amongst others, these places were noticed for, above all, for toy manufacturing, because of the forests, and that was the traditional thing which has actually happened there. So the fight started when they got off the train, and it continued all day. Now the Coburg City Police and the Bavarian State Police didn't know what to do. They'd got themselves into major problems on the 3rd of September 1921 when there was a protest by the Coburg Social Democratic Party and trade unions to mark the murder of a centre MP and former Reichsfinance Matthias Erzberg, who had been killed on the 26th of August 1921 by the right-wing terrorist organisation Consul. So about 2,500 people turned up at Coburg Castle Square, and maybe the police thought these were Bolsheviks or something similar, but the police put on steel helmets. They got a machine gun. They set up roadblocks, which upset the demonstrators, obviously, because it's quite a provocative thing to do. And then the fight started, and the police even threw hand grenades and fired live rounds. 20 people injured, 6 had to be taken to hospital. And on the 5th of September 1921, 1 person died as a result of a gunshot wound. So this had been a peaceful demonstration. So the SPD weren't noted for starting fights and things like that. But that's what it happened. Maybe it's because they failed to liaise with each other, talk about what they were doing. Maybe it's because the police, being on the further to the right, nationalist right, they thought to make an example of them. I don't know. But because they got into trouble for this, now that Hitler had turned up and a genuine bunch of people who were likely to be violent, then they chose to do more or less nothing. Now, the government, a local state government, had banned the SA from marching with music and flags, but this was ignored. And then they all went down to the Hofbräugastetten. It's on Möhrenstrasse. Sorry, it was on Möhrenstrasse because it was knocked down in 71. And then they had some accommodation arranged for them as a Schützenhaus, which was like a I don't know, it's like a hostel, I suppose, at the time, a shooting house. And so there were street battles with about 500, 600 counter demonstrations later there. So injuries on both sides. Now, the main event was meant to take place in a drinking establishment there, which could hold 3,000 people, and invited was Karl Edward, Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, with his missus, Victoria Adelheid. And so the speakers included Hitler, Dietrich Eckart, Anton Drexler, and Hermann Hesse. Now, Hitler was said to be quite a good speaker. I mean, it sounds quite funny to us now, but the other three weren't. Nonetheless, Karl Edward said to be quite impressed by everything that was going on, and so he met Hitler the next day. And so we don't know what they talked about, but Hitler must have been impressed, because though he attacked later at times, he attacked the sort of the aristocracy and things like that. But at the time that this aristocrat, albeit British, would want to speak to him, who would personally only 10 years earlier been a tramp, a homeless tramp, this must have impressed him no end. So during the night there was sort of serious clashes again, and so Hitler arranged for the Sunday to have a march up the castle. And the castle is one of the best medieval castles in Germany. It goes back to 1056, and now the trip up to the castle, it's called the Vesta, but the trip that wasn't on the advertised program. But Hitler must have thought of, look, there's a nice castle up there. We'll have a walk up there. It does take well, it's a castle at the top of a hill. I mean, it's going to take 20 minutes to get up there, and if you've got all these people with you, 1,500 people apparently. Sort of according to Hitler, 1,500 people. Then it's going to take a bit of a walk to get up to the top there. So in an hour or so, maybe, with trying to keep everything in order. And so then there was a final event at the Hofbräuhaus, and Hitler gave another speech. The National Socialists then marched to the railway station at Coburg with the flags and the music, and they got there around 2200 hours. Around 30 SA men went to the home of Abraham Friedman, and because they accused him of paying for counter demonstrations. Now, Abraham Friedman was Jewish. He owned the Grossman meat factory. Today, incidentally, there's this it's very nice hotel. His former home was turned into a hotel, and so I went in to have a look at it when I was there, and I didn't know, but it was the lady owner of the place. When she gave me a business card, I recognized the name, but she showed me around and she gave me the business card, and I was really very impressed by what she'd done there. So it looked really good. So I was actually I worked for a hotel development company, so I will keep an interest in things like that. So anyway, Abraham Friedman was threatened by these SA men that they were going to kill him. So he was 49 years old. He was a war veteran. He'd been wounded several times. When the Nazis did come to power, so 10 years later, he was kidnapped. He was severely assaulted. His business was stolen from him. He had to flee to Berlin, and from there he fled to Paris, and he died in 1938. So this march on Coburg went down in the self-created National Socialist legend as the March on Coburg, and this was based on the March on Rome of the Italian fascists. But I need to point out that there's a mistake here within historiography, because Hitler's March on Coburg happened before Mussolini's March on Rome, and so both of these two marches took place by walked down to the train station, but that was it. They went on by train. And what was so significant, though, was the fact that they showed that they're not just a Munich-based organization, and give them the lead on all these other organizations, and in particular Schutz und Trutzbund. Now, one person, Julius Streicher, who was a member of something called the German Socialist Party, he left the German Socialist Party on the 20th of October 1922 and came over to the Nazis. Why is that significant? Is that in the summer of 1921, Dietrich Eckart and Adolf Hitler went to Berlin. Meanwhile, in Munich, Anton Drexler, as the boss of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, tried to join the Nazi Party to the German Socialist Party. Hitler found out, came back, found out about it, went berserk, resigned, and the only way to get him back was that Eckart had to say to him, look, you can be the boss, you can run the thing. So they had an election, and Anton Drexler, he stood also against Hitler. He got one vote. Presumably he voted for himself, so everybody else voted for Hitler, presumably. And so that is what's significant about this. So the fact that this is brought Hitler to the fore. He's the number one lunatic right-wing nationalist party in Bavaria as a result. I can quote you something here from Alfred Rosenberg, and he said this actually on the 18th of October 1922 in the Völkische Beobachter. The significance of this day and its consequences could not initially be fully appreciated. Not only did the victorious SA become extraordinarily improved in its self-confidence and belief in the rightness of its leadership, the people around us began to take a closer look at us, and many recognized for the first time in the National Socialist movement the institution that in all probability would one day be called upon to put an appropriate end to Marxist madness. But the experience of Coburg had the further significance that we now set about breaking it and establishing freedom of assembly in all places where the Red Terror had prevented any gathering of dissidents for many years. From now on, National Socialist battalions were repeatedly assembled in such places, and gradually one red stronghold after another in Bavaria fell victim to National Socialist propaganda. The SA had grown more and more in its task, and thus moved further and further away from the character of a senseless and virtually unimportant defense movement, and had risen to become a lively fighting organization for the establishment of a new German state. So that's what Rosenberg thought of it. Now here I'm going to quote from Hitler in Mein Kampf. Some of these things, this comes from Mein Kampf, so some of the facts are incorrect, but I'll say that I'm quoting. So, Völkisch associations plan to hold a so-called German Day in Coburg. I myself received an invitation to it, but remarking that it would be desirable to me to bring a written escort. This request, which I received at 11 o'clock in the morning, came very opportunely. An hour later, the arrangements for attending this German Day had been issued. As an escort, I appoint 800 of the SA. We arranged to transport them in approximately 14 companies by special train to the little city that had become part of the state of Bavaria. Similar orders went out to National Socialist SA groups, which had meanwhile been formed in other places. It was the first time that such a special train was used in Germany. At all towns where new SA men got on, the transport aroused much attention. Many people had never seen our flags before. The impression they made was very great. When we arrived at Coburg station, we were received by a delegation of the organizers of the German Day, which conveyed to us an order from the local trade unions, in other words, from the Communist Party, to the effect that we were forbidden to enter the town with flags unfurled or with music. We'd taken along a 42-piece marching band of our own to march in a solid column. I at once flatly rejected these disgraceful conditions and did not fail to express to the gentlemen present, the organizers of this Congress, my surprise that they had carried on negotiations with these people and entered into agreements. I declared that the SA would immediately line up in companies and march into the city with resounding music and flags flying. And that's just what happened. On the square in front of the railway station, we were received by a howling, shrieking, and mob numbering thousands. Murderers, bandits, robbers, criminals were the lovely names which the model founders of the German Republic affectionately showered on us. The young SA men kept exemplary order. The companies were formed on the square in front of the station, and at first they took notice of the vulgar abuse. In the city, that was strange to all of us. Frightened police officials led the marching column, not as arranged, to our quarters, a shooting gallery situated on the outskirts of Coburg, but to the Hofbräuhaus Keller near the centre of the city. To the left and the right of the procession, the uproar of the masses of people accompanying us increased more and more. Hardly had the last company turned into the courtyard of the Keller than great masses amid deafening cries tried to crowd in after us. To prevent this, the police locked the Keller. Since the state of affairs was intolerable, I had the SA men line up once again, gave them a brief speech of admonition, and demanded that the police open the gates immediately. After a long hesitation, they yielded. To get to our quarters, we marched back the way we'd come, and now at last a stand had to be taken. After they had been unable to disturb our companies by cries and insults, the representatives of true socialism, equality, and fraternity had recourse to stones. At this, our patience was at an end, and so for 10 whole minutes, a devastating hail fell from left and right, and quarter of an hour later, there was nothing rare to be seen in the streets. In the evening, there were serious clashes again. Some National Socialists had been assaulted singly, and patrols of the SA found them in a terrible condition. Thereupon, we made short shrift of our foes. By next morning, the Red Terror under which Coburg had suffered for years had been broken. With real Marxist Jewish lies, they now attempted to harry the comrades of the international proletariat back into the streets by totally twisting the facts and maintaining that our bands of murderers had begun a war of extermination against peaceful workers in Coburg. The great demonstration of the people, which it was hoped tens of thousands of workers from the whole vicinity would attend, was set for 1:30. Therefore, firmly resolved to dispose of the Red Terror for good, I ordered the SA, which had meanwhile swollen to nearly 1,500 men, to line up and set out with them on the march for the Coburg fortress by way of the great square in which the Red demonstration was to take place. I wanted to see whether they would dare to molest us again. When we entered the square, only a few hundred were present instead of the announced 10,000, and as I approached, they generally kept quiet. Some ran away. Only a few points did Red troops, who had meanwhile come in from the outside and who did not yet know us, try to pester us again. But in the twinkling of an eye, all the enthusiasm was spoiled, and now it could be seen how the frightened, intimidated population slowly woke up and took courage and ventured to shout greetings to us, and in the evening, as we were marching off, broke into spontaneous cheering in many places. At the station, the railway men suddenly informed us that they would not run the train. Thereupon, I notified a few of the ringleaders that in that case, I planned to round up whatever Red bosses fell into my hands, and that we would run the train ourselves. We would, however, take along a few dozen of the brothers of international solidarity on the locomotive and tender and in every car. Nor did I fail to call to the gentleman's attention that the trip with our own forces would of course be an extremely risky undertaking, and that it would not be ruled out that some of us would end up having our necks and bones broken. But anyway, in that case, we would be delighted to leave for the hereafter, not alone, but in equality and fraternity with the Red gentleman. Thereupon the train departed with the utmost punctuality, and we were back in Munich safe and sound the following morning. Thus, for the first time since 1914, the equality of citizens before the law was re-established in Coburg. For if today some simpleton of a higher official ventures the assertion that the state protects the lives of its citizens, this was certainly not the case at the time, and for that time the citizens had to defend themselves against the representatives of the present day state. Right, so Hitler wrote that 2 years later, no, less than 2 years later, in fact it was in the summer of 1924. So as his recollections, he is making the assumption that several hundred people from Coburg sort of joined them. I think that people might have actually joined the walk up to the castle just out of curiosity. Sounds the sort of thing. That sounds the sort of thing I might have done actually. I've got to say though, for Hitler, that's an incredibly long description. If you look at some other Hitler's stuff that he's written about what he did in the war, for example, it's nothing like that. And I just don't. I don't have words. He's given such a long description. The there are other people actually look back on this as a sort of a great day out for them. And on the 10th anniversary, October 1933, Nazis are now in power, and what they did, they showed a lot of respect to the old fighters, so to speak. And so on the 10th anniversary, they had a medal was actually given. So the medal itself actually came from 1932, so it was really from the 9th anniversary, but it was sort of stopped getting awarded on the 10th anniversary. So that was awarded to anybody who was there at the time, and in the order of the badges which they gave, the blood order, which is the one they got for the people who took part in the putsch to overthrow the German state in 9th November 1923. So that's number one, but this was in second one, a most important one. So at least 422 old fighters got the Coburg medal, and it was later given as an honorary basis. And one of the recipients of the Coburg medal being Queen Victoria's grandson, former member of the British royal family, Carl Edward, who was still living there. Anyway, good. So if you got one of these Coburg medals, you can't wear them today. It's illegal in Germany. So after the event, 86 people from Coburg got together on the 24th of October 1922. They went to a place called the Weißer Ross Inn, which still stands. I have photographs and a film of it, at Judengasse 36. That's a good name, Jew Street. And they formed a local group. And so when they had the first meeting on the 14th of January 1923, they only had 40 members, but the grew and grew and grew. And by September of that year, there was around 600 members, which really is quite a lot, actually, for such a small place. Now, on the 1st of April 1923, the group leader was a character called Franz Schrader, whom I think I did a video on him. I don't think I've published it though. Sorry, I haven't published it. As far as I can recall, I don't think I've published it. Anyway, never mind. It's one of these ones that's sort of lying around. And in the local elections on the 23rd of June 1929, the Nazi Party got 43.1% of the vote. That's 1929. So it gave it an absolute majority. It got in this 13 or 15 seats in the city council. And it was the 18th of January 1931. The swastika flew for the first time on a public building at Coburg Town Hall. And so 16th of October 1931, Franz Schrader was elected mayor of Coburg, and on the 26th of February 1932, Coburg became the first city to grant Adolf Hitler honorary citizenship. 26th of February 1932. So it's 11 months before he was granted power. And so it's 1939 where Coburg was allowed to be called the first National Socialist city of Germany. Right. Anyway, so good. That's my presentation on this place. It'd been better if I had some pictures though, because it's really it's really a magnificent place. It's one of the last yesterday I was thinking of doing a list of my favorite places, and Coburg certainly would be amongst them. Anyway, okay, let's come on through some of the comments. So hello David, Mohammed, Craig, and David makes the very good point that the symbol of Coburg is a black person, and I met someone there when I was there. In fact, in my case, what happened, I arrived there quite late. It was a Friday night, and the parking I had wasn't particularly interesting. So it was in this car park in the centre. Now normally if I'm in a motorhome, I want to go somewhere a little bit more how should I put it, nice than a car park. I mean, car parks are all right, but it was the heat of summer as well, and so it was June, and it was. Anyway, the next day I went on to the tourist office, and when I was there, I met someone, and he was very kind. He runs a taxi company, but he also works as a guide. and he started writing down things I have to do and what I want to see. And then there was a company I wanted to see because of the Nazi links, which I thought were quite interesting. And so he did arrange for me to actually for them to actually give me a presentation of a historian they had. A company's called Bose, and I'll do something on that another time. Anyway, thanks to him, I saw a huge amount, and anyway, and it was him. He told me what the symbol means, but I've forgotten now. But the symbol is a black person. Anyway, so David also makes the point, Elon Musk is really good at marketing too. Yes, he is. And if Donald Trump can do anything, that's marketing. I mean, it's giving the impression of something. So Christopher makes the point that, like at high school, going to keg parties, hoping there would be a fist fight. Yeah, well, I missed out on that one. And RB says sounds worse than playing away at Leeds. Playing at Leeds, I wasn't so bad at Leeds. It was the fights, as I recall them, were in the 70s, were so places like Millwall, and I wrote it was a comment. It was one of these. It was a video showing a news thing about football matches in 1973. Millwall fans, something like 73. I can't quite remember the year. Anyway, so I wrote some insult about Millwall fans and people from Newcastle sort of being the hard cases. But no one ever insulted me back. Anyway, and hello, Colin and Hans, and so. So Colin says the Wartburg Eisenacher was a very nice looking car. Well, I think we might disagree on that one, Colin. And Christopher asked, is there a book that researched this early period? I think there's a number of books on this subject. I'm a bit lost to actually say one to actually go for in particular, but I'm going to think. I'll have to think about it. You might have to bring that subject up again. And Saj says it should read Uncle Donny's 2025 trip to Mar-a-Lago. Well, I doubt it would take that form. And Hans says not much of a destination, to be honest. Okay, well, I think Coburg is quite good. And Hans would be like a march on Hornchurch, where I was staying, but not any longer. And Sarge, I think, is in Ramstein. Occident writes Red Terror paid for by the usual suspects. Don't know what that's supposed to mean. And is there a problem with your mic, says Tosh, as it's very scratchy sounding at times, not trying to be a pain, just don't want to miss bits of history. Thanks. Right, look, I'm not using a microphone, I'm using my mobile phone. If anything, I would have thought that would have been the network, the reception. I don't know, sorry, if anybody else has got if it sounds bad, please write it down. I bought a microphone in the United States, and it never really worked, so I don't think I ever really used it. I took it back because I'm very good at things like in the United States. You can take things back, and so I've just used the microphone on the telephone. So I'm using my telephone, which is Samsung S23 Ultra, and so like that. Christopher says it would be worth someone researching the history of the German police forces pre-1933. Well, I have mentioned that in several videos. Actually, I have done something which will be shown the week Friday after next, and where I discuss this problem. Although how Himmler, maybe it's not quite that, but it's in Bavaria. Okay, right. I'm gonna go and have a look. Let's have a look at some of the points from yesterday, if I can. So, because that was yesterday, I talked about Karl Lasch, ultra corrupt person, and so I thought it might be interesting to sort of just look at some of the comments from that. And Karl writes, now I said that the book written by Nicholas Frank, I read 3 pages. I found it obscene, It was I found it pretty disgusting anyway. And so I got 3 pages. I lent it to somebody. I bought it about 30 years ago. I mean, I haven't spoken to the person I lent it to for about 20 or something. But I learned so anyway, I haven't got it anymore. I bought it in Polish. But anyway, so Carl says, I totally agree with you, Nicholas Frank's book. I bought it and read the first few pages and decided it was unreadable. Really over the top invective that it became tiring really fast. Yeah, it was really awful. And yeah, Grief Tourist says the same. Whatever was he thinking? It's incredibly annoying. Pity, because obviously an interesting subject. I think Nicholas Frank hates his father so much. And I can understand why. But the trouble is, it's really difficult. Anyway, so Tosh says, I thought you'd sort of said, let's be frank about Lash. There's a little joke there. And so Prime liked the video. And Tailored Deceit says, Safia, yesterday. Here's a good point. Here's a good point here. Says Stephen, I don't know if Lash would have been under his jurisdiction, but there was an SS lawyer and investigator named Conrad Morgan, who, while initially investigating grift and petty crime at Buchenwald, discovered some roads led east and stumbled into corruption, theft, grift, and embezzlement on a grand scale. Now, Conrad Morgan, this is absolutely correct. Now, Conrad Morgan started investigating people at Auschwitz, for example, and one of them, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. He was a captain in the SS. Sorry, this is more excusable than the name I forgot yesterday, which was Rudolf Hess, but can't remember his name. It's gone. Anyway, he did an investigation on the head of the SS supply office. He'd been at Auschwitz and then he'd been at Warsaw. And what he was doing, he's stealing stuff, or confiscating, if you like, but stealing, and then selling it on the black market. And even as he had official troops, including rations and things, that was getting sold on the black market. Anyway, he got caught. Morgan had him sentenced to death, and he was executed. Now, there was a huge amount of, not huge, I'm exaggerating. Sorry, I'll rephrase now. About 15 people, at least 15, were actually indicted by Conrad Morgan, including, for example, Koch, who was later shot, who'd been a commandant at Sachsenberg, and it was at Buchenwald, and others. But he also indicted some of the Auschwitz staff as well. And the most famous person that was indicted was Fegelein. And yeah, the Fegelein, not his brother, but the one who appears in Downfall, Himmler's adjutant. Now, Himmler got him off, but in fact, a number of these people who were indicted were got off. But Conrad Morgan, he lived until he's 72. He was 70 when he died. He would have been about 1980 something, 85, maybe 83. I can't remember. But he himself was actually, he ended up giving evidence both for the defense and for the prosecution in the cases of war criminals. So anyway, he's a really I think he's a really important person there. And so then anyway. So yeah. Anyway, I don't think that Morgan investigated Karl Lasch. As far as I'm aware, he didn't. I don't know, because the investigation of Karl Lasch was held in Breslau, not in Warsaw or in Krakow. Anyway, so Stephen goes on to write, I've read that Morgan, at least in Himmler's view, became too zealous in his investigations, ending up in some extensive investigations and indictments. I seem to remember a post-war interview with Morgan. I'll see if I can jump on YouTube. So, so thanks for that comment. That's a really good one. I don't know of any interviews with him, but I'll certainly actually I really ought to do it anyway. And Gerd mentions a good little joke of mine here, so I'm gonna have to move this over. And it's this: lawyers know the law, therefore it's the easiest for them to exploit the law, find the gaps, loopholes, find excuses. And it's notable that most lawyers write law. Most, if you look at people in any house, parliament, about a third of them at least are lawyers. So what does that tell you? I think the lawyers, because they're good at arguing things in court, that could be the reason why. I always thought I'd be quite good as a lawyer. I mean, I'm not much good at arguing things in court, I don't think, but I think I am quite good at contractual law and so forth. Mind you, I'd probably just get bored, so there'd be no point in me doing that. Anyway, good. Right, so I think that's that for today. Thanks very much for watching. Tomorrow, I'm going to do something on the deportation of the Jewish population of Berlin, and so that'll be at that time. On Friday, there is there's a video on I think it's the first execution in the Third Reich, and on Saturday I'll be traveling, so I'll be back. I don't know what if I can do anything in 1 or 2 days next week. I'll be in Heilbronn. So if I'm in Heilbronn, I can do it, but if I'm on the road somewhere, it'll be difficult for me to do. Anyway, good. Thank you. So David makes the point: lawyers are good at technicalities. Yes, they are. Yes. So thanks so much for watching. Bye for now. I hope the sound was okay. And if it wasn't, though, do say. I mean, usually I can't do anything when there's a problem with sound. But anyway, thanks. Bye.